I hope you live up to the legends.
Crimson Desert feels like it was designed in a lab by someone who wanted to combine elements of all their favorite big-budget open-world games into the ultimate video game. It's got the adventuring of The Witcher 3, the slow horseback conversations of Red Dead Redemption 2, the open-ended puzzle solving of Tears of the Kingdom, and the do-whatever-you-want dynamic world of something like Skyrim or Grand Theft Auto 5. And while it's genuinely impressive that developer Pearl Abyss even attempts to smash all these things I love into a single package, the result ends up being a jack-of-all-trades, but a master of none. The exploration and combat fall far short of the best open-world adventure games, the dialogue, characters, and story are laughably bad, the puzzles are unintuitive and janky, and the reactivity of the world around you is underwhelming. But despite all the frustrations I've faced across the 130 hours it took me to complete the main story and do a good chunk of the side content, there were still many moments where I was left stunned by the sheer magnitude of the uneven world that's been created here. In its best moments, Crimson Desert has you wandering around, arm wrestling, fishing, gambling, completing side quests, and just getting lost in an absolutely gorgeous open world where it feels like anything is possible. One moment I was playing a mini settlement builder, managing resources and sending my allies out to earn loot and resources on my behalf, and the next I was hunting wild animals and grilling them into a pile of meat to prepare for a big battle. But there were an equal number of occasions where I was absolutely dumbfounded by annoying choices, like how combat encounters almost always go on way too long, or how controls just don't work consistently, so you'll never know if tapping X while in the air will cause you to double jump like you intended, or glide to the ground missing the platform you were aiming for. Many of these issues get far worse the longer you play, as later on, the size of enemy groups goes to ridiculous Dynasty Warriors levels, and some of the mechanics they add later, like mounting flying beasts, just hilariously don't work as you tumble off the side hopelessly. The world itself is definitely one of the most impressive aspects of Crimson Desert, as you can see people walking around town and actually living out their days in real time. For example, if you send a caravan of followers to go build something, you can drop by during work hours to see them toiling away before heading back to bunk at night. In another instance, you might see a bounty posted for a known pickpocket, then find them one day practicing their trade in a completely different town, and can then choose to bring them to justice or let it slide. Traveling around the massive regions, hunting for loot, solving puzzles, and liberating areas can make for some seriously good times. Especially if you're like me and try to do things it feels like you aren't supposed to do, like wandering far off the beaten path before you've even explored the starting area. It's a kind of freedom that only games this absurdly large can pull off, and makes for some really memorable moments. While the world you'll explore is full of fun stuff to do, the stories you'll find in it are consistently bad. From the moment you're introduced to the first of its 3 playable characters, Cliff, a Viking-coded warrior who is on a low-stakes revenge quest against another group of barbarians, there's very little to become invested in, and it only gets worse from there. The story is aimless, the characters are forgettable across the board, the dialogue is often pretty hard to listen to, and there's an entire multi-chapter arc in the main quest line that's centered on a character who dies off-screen before the story even begins. They continually try to make you care about this person through multiple funeral scenes separated by hours and hours of game time. It's odd because with long sequences of talking to your companions and a lot of time spent watching cutscenes as part of the main story, it does seem like Pearl Abyss wanted people to care about this stuff, but almost none of it is really worth paying attention to, and much of it is actively cringeworthy.
And you had it? What I do with some bloody rock? Eat it?
That said, there were also a lot of cutscenes full of cool, anime-style fights, and those are pretty sick.
Piss off!
Crimson Desert's world is also hindered at almost every turn by jankiness and puzzling design choices. Some of the biggest misses are the boss fights. which abruptly take you out of the fairly casual action game combat that surrounds them and drops you into straight-up Souls-like fights against multi-phase enemies that feel extremely out of sync with the rest of the adventure. In one of the earliest examples, you carve your way through scores of bandits with ease before concluding with a super long 3-phase boss fight that includes some segments where you're just mercilessly swarmed by the bad guy while you have to dash around destroying totems. The only reasonable way to get through it is to have a ton of healing items on hand to eat by the fistful as you whittle down the enemy's health bar. I love Souls-likes and consider myself a tryhard who enjoys mastering perfect parry mechanics, and even with my background, I found the vast majority of these boss fights to be unfun, poorly balanced, and downright annoying. It's kind of wild how out of place they feel, and they are common enough to regularly hurt the pacing. It's worth noting that Pearl Abyss has already put out a patch that nerfed at least one of these encounters, and I suspect more will follow. I'm not sure patches alone will be able to make these numerous, sluggish fights feel all that good, but it's at least a start that they seem to be aware of the issue. Part of the reason I doubt boss fights will be fully salvageable is because combat is pretty uneven in general. A big part of that is in how Crimson Desert simply never knows when to end a fight. Most begin with a dozen or more enemies surrounding you, and then dozens more showing up as you take down the first wave, dragging things out for minutes on end. This is fine when you're taking on some major quests, but when you're just trying to cross a bridge and are expected to stop and fight 20 samey guards first, it really eats up your time. Even worse are the war scenarios that arrive in the middle of the later stages of the adventure, when you're asked to do ridiculous things like plant a flag in the ground while surrounded by dozens and dozens of enemies, completely unable to defend yourself while you slowly move a giant banner across the battlefield. It's especially annoying that, although you can level up your weapons and armor to make all this combat easier, you're constantly outnumbered by loads of dudes who can take you out with a few lucky shots. As you can imagine, starting an already too long fight over again feels especially bad. Beyond combat, there's tons of stuff Crimson Desert tries that just doesn't work at all. From extremely ill-advised stealth sections, which are exactly as bad as you're imagining, to puzzles that often feel like you're brute forcing your way through them rather than coming up with a creative solution. In one section, I had to climb to a higher area to solve a puzzle, but couldn't reach that high due to stamina limitations. After searching for the correct way to climb up to the next floor, I ended up just cheesing my way up by finding a ledge that let me take a breather in a way that seemed very much unintentional. When I got to the top and solved the puzzle, it felt like I'd done something wrong, but apparently that's just what you're supposed to do to get through that section. In trying so many things, this adventure often feels like it's bitten off more than it can chew, resulting in pockets of gameplay like this that can feel very underdeveloped.
He who breaks the chains of convention and seeks the truth
Right.
shall witness miracles!
As you complete quests, earn loot, and level up abilities, you'll at least gain access to some pretty neat abilities that change up the way you play. One branch of each playable character's skill tree is dedicated to flying or gliding around to improve your mobility, while another unlocks new combat tricks, like the ability to bash enemies with your shield or drop kick foes and send them flying about 50 feet. Many of these unlockables are really interesting, like one that lets you grapple yourself across long distances and scale sheer walls in the blink of an eye. The other half of them are things I never really had any interest in buying, like basically all of the archery skills, which didn't feel good no matter how much I invested in them. There are also a huge number of combat abilities that seem like they're almost clones of one another, which would require me to memorize a whole new button combination to use them that I'd surely never remember. Part of this has to do with the control mapping, which is completely insane by default, and requires you to remember various multi-step button combinations to access abilities that you have to use all the time. It took me hours to remember that clicking the left thumbstick makes you crouch, holding down the left thumbstick brings out one of your special gadgets you'll use frequently, and sprinting is, in fact, not on the left thumbstick at all, but instead asks you to tap the A button repeatedly to go faster than a run, which seems crazy to me. I mean, what is this, Grand Theft Auto? There are a whole bunch of little mapping things like this that took me at least a dozen hours to get used to, and which I still occasionally fumble since so many abilities make use of the same buttons and require multiple inputs in a specific order to do the things you want. One of the more amusing ones comes when you get a dragon mount much later on, but trying to summon it is an absolutely huge pain in the neck every single time. You have to press a button to mount it at just the right time, but it's super finicky, and most of the time you just tumble off the side and go plummeting to the ground. Truly infuriating stuff. One thing that never stops being incredibly impressive, however, is how good Crimson Desert looks and performs. I played exclusively on my high-end PC. We weren't sent console codes ahead of launch, so I expect it to look glorious there. But it runs quite nicely across all of the setups our team has tested as well, even lower-end ones. For an open-world game of this scale, it's simply wild how consistently it holds frames and looks beautiful doing it. That said, it tends to be another one of those games that looks better from afar. Environments and the massive number of enemies on screen are stunning to behold, but then you'll get into a cutscene to talk to someone, and their face will be a bit janky with the lip syncing that's way off.
That sound like the Urbano you know? Huh? Well, does it? Does it?
Still, even when its frustrating design choices made me want to rage quit, it was hard to stay mad for long when I got back to running around the massive map and just taking in the wildly good-looking views. But just because its performance and graphics are awesome, doesn't mean Crimson Desert is free from bugs and technical issues, and the ones you sometimes get with open-world games of this size are exactly as bad as I feared here. I ran into all sorts of problems, from hard crashes to companions I was supposed to follow getting stuck in the environment until I reloaded. The worst bug came late in the main story when a vital quest step didn't register as I completed it, locking me out of progression entirely unless I reloaded a save file from 7 hours earlier. I was able to proceed by copying a coworker's save file who is roughly at the same part of the story as me and soldiering on that way instead. If I hadn't, I would have likely thrown in the towel right then and there. Getting set back so far by a bug like that one is devastating, and I know I wasn't the only person to hit this one. To its credit, Pearl Abyss says it has patched out that particular issue already, though it doesn't seem to be the only one like it. For example, after finally completing the last main story quest, I'll avoid any spoilers, I went to do an epilogue quest where you stop by to chat with all the friends you made along the way, only for some of them to simply not be there initially. They did eventually show up a while later, but it meant I didn't even get the proper send-off I was supposed to after 130 hours of playing, though there's no real endgame to speak of after that sequence anyway.
This is what we fought for, is it not? Days such as these.
Developer Pearl Abyss is doing its best to address issues as they arise, and it's also done things like add extra fast travel points compared to the review build, and even finally added a storage container that was insane to not have been there at launch. So the version available today already has a few less frustrations across the board, but in a game this big, it's hard to imagine it'll be able to squash all these problems anytime soon. Crimson Desert is an extremely ambitious, open-world adventure, and that ambition is what makes it both incredibly cool and gobsmackingly infuriating in almost equal measure. I had some memorable times exploring this gorgeous world, discovering weird minigames and killing bandits along the way, but those memories were also marred by moments I'd rather forget, like the tedious combat encounters, unintuitive puzzles, awful story, and substantial bugs. There's lots to love about this quirky kitchen sink design, and I admire that it's managed to pack a metric ton of unique mechanics and interesting areas into one package. But it takes work to dig your way through the thick layer of gunk that covers it all, and the mostly competent action-adventure game that's buried beneath is only sometimes worth that effort.
Reviews director Tom Marks here with Travis Northup to once again talk about an RPG. Travis, you reviewed Outer Worlds 2 for us, Avowed, Oblivion Remastered, the Fallout 76 review we did. You've done a ton of these sorts of games. What I want to talk about first with this one is I want to get a sense of your tastes of like open world sprawling RPGs generally, right? So like, are you a fan of the Assassin's Creed, here's a checklist, fill it all out and just do all the things you're told to do? Are you a fan of the Breath of the Wildy style of like, here's an empty map, just go find stuff? Do you like something in between? Do you like the Bethesda style the most? Like, where do you sort of generally gravitate towards in that, knowing that you play a bit of all of it?
Yeah, the answer is yes. I enjoy all of those games. I would say in order of like my favorite, I tend to be a guy who likes fewer instructions and more freedom. So Tears of the Kingdom is like a very different type of RPG in that you're kind of alone with your thoughts, figuring out fun things to do. Whereas my favorite RPG of all time, open world RPG of all time, is Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, because it is a game that does not hold your hand and kind of just says, here's the world, have fun figuring that out. And that can be really great, but it also has more like quest lines and factions to engage with. It's less like isolated than something like Tears of the Kingdom, and more where you're given kind of role-playing options where you could go and join the Fighters Guild and go down that pathway of sword and board, or you could become a magic goblin and run around doing necromancy, and just that level of freedom to like play your own way is really cool to me. So I like all sorts of RPGs though, from Dragon's Dogma to an Assassin's Creed, although I would probably say the checklist Assassin's Creed is probably on the lower end of me, because they're fun. Sometimes you're in the mood for those games, but they are a little bit more, they want you to walk a very specific path, right?
How do you feel about what I like to call the sort of kitchen sink RPG, where it's like, yeah, you've got your normal combat and your leveling and that sort of stuff, but also, hey, there's a card minigame, and hey, you can go fishing, and hey, there's this arm wrestling minigame, and oh, there's this other thing. Like there's a lot of games that do this. Do you think that sort of thing enhances a game or your time with a game? Do you think that it detracts from the parts that you like? Do you think there's a way to do it right or wrong? That sort of stuff.
Yeah, I do love those sorts of RPGs. The challenge with those RPGs is always that you risk becoming a master of none, right? If you try to be a jack of all trades, and you really, I don't think a lot of people spend, like, I can't imagine that the arm wrestling minigame in Crimson Desert like took a lot of time. It's a very simple kind of little minigame there, right? So like, it's not like resources were pulled away. But I will say the kitchen sink method only really works if I'm so invested in the core like world and combat and the stuff that like I'm gonna spend most of my time doing. If I'm not interested in that, then throwing all these extra like bits and baubles can just be bloated and annoying, because I'm just not enjoying myself in like the core game. And so I think that's sort of like the risk you take with the kitchen sink, is like it starts to feel like a little shallow all the way across. And so you really have to make sure that like I want to spend a lot of time in this world and will gladly take time to go and do a fishing mini game. Do
you have off the top of your head a favorite mini game in any of these RPGs across the board? Like my mind, I know it's a cop out of an answer, but I will always think of Triple Triad fondly.
Yeah, Triple Triad's really good. I like the Yakuza Like a Dragon games and the sequel Infinite Wealth. There was a business mini game in that one where you had to run a snack store into like a big empire. I don't know what it was about that game, but I got freaking hooked. All I remember is it was like during the winter break, and I remember I spent like 2 days just doing that. Like, to me, that was the entire game for a while. And I think the Yakuza series probably does the best at mini games in these, because like it's such a huge part of their DNA, and every game they're like completely different. There's one where you're like running around on a shopping cart as a homeless guy, like picking up trash and stuff.
I wanted to talk about part of the review process of a game that's this big, right? That we don't have, you don't have guides already online. You don't have people on social media talking about this, discussing it. You don't have even your friend group also playing it, figuring out these problems together or alongside each other, right? So does your approach change at all? Do you have to do things differently when you're going into a game sort of this big that doesn't tutorialize a lot of stuff, and you just kind of got to figure it out yourself? You had other people at IGN to talk to and bounce off of, so it's not like you were totally alone. But how do you go into something like this where there's not just an answer at your fingertips a Google away constantly?
Yeah, my answer is that I don't Google things ever, even when the game's
Fair
out.
enough.
So my process really doesn't change at all. I'm very prideful, and also to me, part of the joy of games is the discovery and like the unknown, and not knowing kind of where the boundaries are. And I really don't like it. There's this point in a game where you start to notice where the guardrails are, right? You get to the end of the Skyrim map and it tells you to turn back. But I think there's a ton of joy in a game where you haven't figured out where those boundaries are yet, and you're just like allowing yourself to figure it out and have fun and make mistakes and mess up your save file and have to reload and like that sort of stuff. And so honestly, I was getting annoyed when the IGN Guides team was like pinging me about stuff, because I was like, I don't want to know, stop, don't show me this, I don't want to see it yet, right? So some of the guys are like ahead of me in their like alchemy and the like crafting stuff. I hadn't explored any of it yet, and I was just like, no, stop, go, I'm not ready. So yeah, my process doesn't change at all. I'm very stubborn in this regard, and to me there's a purity in the unknown and figuring it out, and sometimes that means I'm way less efficient and I move a lot slower, which is why you've probably noticed, Tom, that like my hour counts in these games is like pretty high. I would say it's higher than the normal curve, and it's just because I have the extra time to invest in it, and I tend to if I'm playing a Souls-like, I'm just figuring out the boss fight on my own and hopefully getting through it, and sometimes that means it takes a little longer. It can be frustrating, but I do think that like the banging the head against your wall, that is part of you figuring out how you feel about a game, right? Like if you skip all of the worst parts of a game because you look it up, you're sort of treating the flaws of a game as lesser than they actually are. And so yeah, it's painful to be stuck on a puzzle for 2 hours, as I was recently, and you get sick of standing in that room and wondering what the hell you're missing. But then afterward, you have this experience where you can talk about how the puzzles are unintuitive, and maybe if you looked it up, you wouldn't feel that way. And so I think there is a little bit of like, you're getting the whole experience, including the stuff that some people would probably rather skip. And yeah, that's my approach to it. It's just go through the pain, man. That's part of the job.
Travis, thank you so much for chatting with us a little bit more about this and your tastes in general. If you want another conversation with Travis about RPGs and his RPG tastes specifically, we talked at the end of his review of The Outer Worlds 2 last year. And then if you want a different, more recent RPG that's very different than Crimson Desert, but still a great RPG, Monster Hunter Stories 3 we just reviewed recently, so you can check that out as well. For everything else, stick with IGN.